So when Ryan and the Creative Mornings team approached me to speak on this topic, it felt only natural to talk about my perspective on Indianapolis, both as a professional in the built environment and also as a relative newcomer to the city. So let's just say I'm here in Indianapolis for a reason. Let me tell you the story. It all started with an Easter egg hunt. Yes, don't worry, it's a metaphor. It'll become clear. So my Lola, this is Filipino for grandmother, she lived on a farm in the Philippines, and I was always really excited to go visit her when I came from the US because it felt like entering a portal to another world where it was very lush, very green, and so beautiful. And my Lola loved to host and entertain guests out there, but her favorite and most elaborate activity was for the kids. So weeks before Easter, she would make these large papier-mâché eggs, and she would fill them with trinkets. And then, out of all of the eggs, one of them she would paint gold. This would contain the best prize, whatever that may be that year, but it would also be the most challenging one to find. So she would gather up all the eggs, and she would go out into the hills, and she would bury them. She was hardcore. So that weeks later, by the time we all arrived, the tropical landscape would have hidden her tracks. And then she would hand us shovels, give us some clues, and off we'd go. And so the hills that we were so familiar with would look like new. The landscape would become a treasure map. A fallen branch from a mango tree could be pointing us in the right direction. A boulder in the middle of a field could be a landmark, or an unusual bend in the river could be a sign to dig there. So I never found a golden egg, but I really loved the satisfaction of searching for it. My mission was to look at the world around me, observing what was there, and imagining what was hidden from plain sight. And I also always found other treasures along the way. But I really appreciate how it was my Lola who was the first person to show me how to see a place as it is and also imagine it as it could be. So I like to think that today, I am still on that treasure hunt, only now I'm a landscape architect and urban designer, designing outdoor spaces. And the city is my treasure map. I look at the built environment and try to imagine the possibilities for our shared streets, parks, and plazas. And so, since I want to help shape cities, I went to Boston to learn how. So this is where the profession of landscape architecture got started in the US. Boston is home to some of the country's oldest parks, like the Boston Common, which is shown here, built in 1634, and the Emerald Necklace, which was built in 1896. So this next portion is a little bit of Landscape History 101, but I promise, like the egg hunt, it'll all make sense. So, go back in time with me. In the 1800s, Boston was undergoing a period of rapid urbanization and population growth. This is what it looked like from above already in 1860. Boston, as the eagle and the wild goose see it. And so it went from being a seaport town to a major metropolis, facing challenges like overcrowding and public health crises like cholera and tuberculosis outbreaks. And so there was a growing recognition that there was a need for open space. So a group of concerned citizens self-organized, and they went and petitioned the city to start setting aside land for public parks. So today, parks in a city are no surprise. But back then, setting aside land without buildings in the middle of the city was a radical idea. And so the city listened. They created a parks commission, who then hired a landscape architect. His name was Frederick Law Olmsted, and you all might already be familiar with him because he had just famously finished overseeing the design and construction of Central Park in New York City. And so Olmsted, he believed that green spaces in cities are sanctuaries from the noise, the grit, the clamor, the pollution of urban life. And so he brought that perspective to Boston. He looked at the existing conditions. On the left, you can see there's a muddy river, and it tended to overflow and flood the surrounding neighborhoods. And he also recognized that they had a singular green space, the Boston Common. And he started to imagine what could be. So on the right, you'll see what he ended up bringing to the city of Boston. And so his proposal was the Emerald Necklace. It was not only a park in Boston, it was a 7-mile-long park system. So if I had a laser pointer, he was going to start at the Boston Common, go along the Commonwealth Ave, incorporate the muddy river, traveling along it, and then start to knit together all these different spaces in the city, the natural features. So he went around a pond, he was going to build an arboretum, and then eventually at the end of the Emerald Necklace, the crowning jewel was going to be a large 527-acre country park. And this was a decades-long project. And so the Emerald Necklace became a place that conserved and enhanced natural landscapes in the city. It also became a breathing place for people to go. If you remember, they were dealing with cholera and tuberculosis and wanted spaces to spread out and feel safe. It also provided a place for recreation and for social connection, while at the same time providing an ecological function in the city with flood control and habitat preservation. And so I was lucky enough to work on the largest park in the Emerald Necklace, both as a student and as an emerging professional. And as I dove deeper into the field and started to gain more experience, I started to see the world around me differently. So as I dove deeper into the field and gained more perspective, I started to see the world around me differently. It made me realize that whether it's 1896 or 2024, green space in cities is not a given. Putting on that double vision and applying it to cities means not only looking forwards, but also looking backwards. Creativity in the built environment is all about perspective. Seeing a place as it is and recognizing how it came to be. So at some point in the past, somebody made a decision, sometimes for the better, like when you come across a strategically placed bench when you're out for a long walk, and sometimes for the worse, like when a road is designed for as many cars as possible, and so when you're a pedestrian trying to cross the street, you feel a little bit uncomfortable, if not unsafe. And so all of these choices and decisions start to inform the built environment around us. And spaces like the Emerald Necklace exist because people recognize the value of green spaces in our cities. They looked at their city as it was, and they dreamed of a vision for the future. They advocated for it, and they continued to care for it over the years. And these people shaped their city for the better, impacting the lives of everyone who lived there. And so throughout my studies and work experience, I kept coming back to this idea that I wanted to be one of those people. I want to be someone who helps design and build a city in which we all want to live, a place where accessibility, sustainability, inclusivity are all prioritized, where we have transportation options that get us where we want to go, and green spaces where we can gather with our neighbors. And so living and studying and working in a place like Boston, which has so much history, was really great for starting to think about how to even go about doing this. But it also made me realize that Boston has about a 200-year head start on a lot of other cities. And it made me curious, what other cities are out there embarking on large, ambitious projects of their own? Where can I find them? I want to go to a place that is still in the making, a place where I can help shape the future. And so as I was contemplating my next move, I had to put that double vision again, looking at places, seeing what they were, where they were, and where they were headed. And as I contemplated my next move, in the summer of 2022, you see the eggs, they're filling in with color? Okay, great. Got it. That coffee is hitting. So in the summer of 2022, as I was contemplating my next move, Chris Merritt of Merritt Chase, he's standing in the back, reached out to me to catch up. So he had been my TA for my landscape architecture studio at the GSD, and as we chatted, he shared some of the work that his firm was working on in Indianapolis, and I was intrigued. Then he mentioned that he needed some help that summer, so I decided to come and see for myself. I was still living in Boston, but I temporarily relocated to Indianapolis for the summer. And we jokingly call it the summer of field trips because we went everywhere in the city. So I learned that Indiana limestone is the nation's building stone, helping build iconic landmarks like the Empire State Building and Lincoln Memorial. I'm seeing some nods, you already knew that. But that was really fun to learn as a newcomer. So I also biked on the many connected trails around Indy, past the famous sports venues and along the White River. I learned about the history of jazz and Black entrepreneurship on Indiana Avenue. And I even went exploring under the city with a tour of the city market catacombs. I also discovered that Indianapolis is a city of neighborhoods, each with a unique identity. And another fun fact, I learned that there was an Olmsted connection to Indianapolis. So Frederick Law Olmsted, his stepson, was in the family business, and he was employed by the city of Indianapolis. He came here and wrote a report, and it was around the same time his father was working on the Emerald Necklace in Boston. And his report was, he recommended the city prioritize parks along its waterways. And so a couple years go by, and a decade later, George Kessler, another landscape architect, who famously was working on other park systems in the Midwest, submitted his Parks and Boulevards plan for Indianapolis, which shows the exact thing that Olmsted and others were already working on, which was parks along the waterways and the major boulevards that bring you into downtown. And we are actually along one still today, Mass Ave. So as my temporary gig with Merritt Chase came to an end, I started to reflect on my summer in Indianapolis. I noticed how kind people are, encountering that Hoosier hospitality. I was moved by how community-minded everyone was. I kept receiving invitations to join book clubs, sketching groups, writing groups. And I was also impressed with how entrepreneurial everyone is. It felt like everyone I met in Indy was working on something innovative, taking risks on something they believed in, and doing everything from building bookstores and co-working spaces, organizing cultural fairs, and showcasing the arts. It felt like I had found a city of dreamers. So, to be honest, before that summer, and from afar, I really did not know that much about Indianapolis. And it was upon arrival that my perspective changed from experiencing it firsthand. Once in Indy, seeing it up close, there were so many gems to uncover. And I met so many people who were passionate about the future of the city and were working towards positive change. So, when Chris and his business partner, Nina, offered to make the temporary gig full-time, I decided to make the official decision to move to Indianapolis.
Hell yeah.
Woo! Yes, all right. And we got to work, on projects both big and small throughout the city. And I want to share more about one very fun project in particular. So, Merritt Chase worked with the city and other consultants on the South Downtown Connectivity Vision Plan. This is a blueprint for public space investment in the southern half of the Mile Square downtown. And so part of the process was collecting feedback from everyone while also acknowledging the voices and experiences previously excluded. And so this meant going with a planning process that was bigger, bolder, more transparent. So we were trying to invite people with these large billboards on an online mood board, listening with on-the-street interviews, and then taking all that we were hearing and planning public spaces where we could start to test some of the ideas that people were suggesting activating those spaces, and then starting the cycle over again, inviting people to those spaces, listening, testing, and the cycle continues. And so we got a lot of great feedback, and some of the things we were hearing were that, it's probably no surprise, today South Downtown caters heavily to the visitor experience by car. And many community members want to see car-free spaces. They also want to see improved streetscapes. They want to have more frequent activation and local culture. They also want to see a greater diversity of public spaces, as well as a few other things. And so if we take that double vision that I've been talking about and apply it to the streets of Indianapolis, we might start to see a few things that weren't immediately obvious. So, well, this might be a little bit obvious, but the streets in Indianapolis are very wide. So on average, a street in downtown is about 90 feet wide. And because of that gridded street plan, it's very easy in a car, wide, straight equals fast. So when you're going down the street, that is mostly for cars, as a pedestrian, you're kind of pushed to the sides. And so it just shows the emphasis. Wide street for cars, very narrow sidewalk for people. And also when you're walking down the street, you'll start to notice that there aren't a lot of street trees. That's just due to a lot of historic zoning and overlays. Also a lot of inactive street fronts. And things like we're missing maybe some more lighting, more human scale elements. And so starting to apply that double vision, thinking about what could be. All right, I see got some votes. So this is the same base, same street. This is Meridian Street. And starting to do things like having these bump outs at the corners so that the crosswalk isn't so wide. And then those bump outs, there are going to have to be some trade-offs. Starting to pull from that 90-foot width and create buffers between cars going by and people walking on the street. So there could be parallel parking, some plants. And then starting to go along along the storefronts, thinking about activating those, coming up with things to draw people in, maybe having some movable furniture that people can hang out and just be part of the street life. Also adding some more trees so that when you're walking, it's not just you and then a really tall building. There's a tree that helps you feel a little bit more enclosed, as well as shade on a really hot day. And also, adding street trees with these LAs is they start to line the street and draw your eye further down, because one of the benefits of those gridded streets is we set up views for some of our iconic landmarks. So these are some of the things we can start to do. Add variety, change up the scale, start to make it more comfortable and safer for pedestrians. And so we talk a lot at Mayor Chase about the typical design process in the built environment. Typically you plan something, you build it, then you plan something else, and you build that. And so we try to find ways to disrupt that a little bit more. Find ways that maybe before, these are long projects, find ways that maybe we can phase it and start to test certain things with prototypes or models and take what we learn from that and apply it to other things that we're designing and building. And then once we build a piece of that, engaging more people, that starts to inform as we begin again, the feedback cycle, as we phase and test and keep going. And so iterating, constantly taking in new feedback and trying to be better. And so one of the projects that came out of the vision plan was the opportunity to test some of the feedback we were hearing with potential improvements. And we were hoping that we could do this temporary intervention on the circle and learn some lessons that we could apply to more permanent, upcoming, long-term public space investment in the city. So we collaborated with a great team of partners. Our role was to set the stage for the city, Big Car, and downtown Indy to do what they do best with community gathering, the arts, and bringing people together with programming. And Monument Circle is an iconic part of the city's downtown. This was where we were going to do our test. It's built to serve grand events with large crowds of people, but it lacks some of those elements that I was talking about that encourage more organic daily activity. And so when we started to dive into the history, it was also interesting to learn that this used to be a park. This used to be a green space before the monument was there. So there's always been this, people have always wanted this space to be a place to gather at the heart of the city. And so inspired by the park and the Monument Circle, we worked with our team of partners to envision a temporary park out there. And let's see. We hit the ground running. So I just want to talk a little bit more about the design that we came up with. So building on that Monument Circle, the big circle, we wanted to, again, scale things to the more human scale. So you can start to see the different circles here. We were looking at the circles created zones for different activities. So smaller circles for more intimate gatherings, and then larger circles for bigger events. And to even make those circles, we worked with our vendors. They rolled out the synthetic turf like carpet, and then they formed a human compass. So they got a rod. Geometry coming in handy, right? They got a rod, they got a cable, and if you see this red contraption, it has a blade, and then they went in a big circle around to get those really big circles we had out there. And our largest one was about 50 feet, and our smallest one was about 20. And something that we did end up learning, we always kind of inherently knew this, but we started to see that the circle shape, when people started to gather in the space, you just naturally turn inward. You gravitate towards the edges, but because of the shape, you're still oriented to other people. You can people watch, you can see what's going on. And Big Car brought in a group of teens who were looking to learn more about careers around the city, and so we had a great time working with them and hearing their thoughts as we worked on putting this installation together. And then something else, because this was a temporary activation, we got to be a little bit more bold and whimsical with the color, and so we really leaned into the idea of greening the city. So green ground layer, green chairs, green umbrellas, you name it, it was green. And it also was a nice complement, color theory, the green against the red bricks. Yes, design, you all have the design eye. So that when you arrived to Monument Circle, you already start to feel that this is a different space. You're crossing into a threshold, into something special. So this is the installation from above. So just some other things I want to point out. We brought in large canopy umbrellas to start to test shade of matured tree canopy. It gets hot in Indianapolis in the summer. We started to bring in some of those other human scale elements like planters that start to just help that big space feel a little bit more the size of a human. And something else we also did was we brought in a variety of seating. So we had large Adirondack chairs where you could sit back, recline. They're more comfortable and to sit in for a long period of time. Then we also had these lighter bistro chairs that you could pick up and move, and it responded to how you wanted to use the space. And so just to remind you, this is what we envisioned on the ground. And this is what it looked like built. Pretty good, huh? And this photo actually shows one of my favorite features. So we had those large Adirondack chairs for the adults, but we also scaled it down and got some kid-sized ones. And on opening day, a family was walking by me, and one of their kids saw it, pointed at it, said, "Look, a chair for me," and ran straight for it. And so that was a really special moment I'll always remember. And it was just incredible to see the response to the space. What was once an area that you mostly drove through, maybe stopped, got your quick photo of the monument, then got back in your car, it became a place you could sit back, relax, hang out. And it was really fun to go there on a Sunday night or Sunday afternoon and see families just hanging out, their kids playing, people eating ice cream, just chatting, hanging out. Another really fun moment I always really loved observing was when kids and sometimes adults would remove their socks and shoes and then just be running across the grass barefoot. So definitely something you couldn't do before. The space was also able to accommodate more formal activation. So Big Car and Downtown Indy oversaw over 180 events during the 5 months it was open with the Spark on the Circle programming. But a good marker of success for a public space is its ability to host that more daily organic activity. So maybe you were downtown and you weren't planning on going here, but because it was eye-catching and something different, you decided to stay and hang out. And my personal marker of success of a good public space is whenever I see a person reading a book, because it's a solitary activity, they can just do it at home, but they're choosing to do it out in public to be part of city life. and I saw a lot of people reading books here. So the space was open for 5 months, and again, remember talking about that typical design build process. We also used this as an opportunity, since we were testing some of these things out, to collect feedback to inform the longer-term public space investment that's coming. And it was great that we're out there, we're observing things, we're asking for feedback. It was also nice to collect numbers and see that the numbers were backing up what we were seeing out there. So I already mentioned there were over 180 events that took place. We had about 350,000 people attend those events. There was a 25% increase in foot traffic compared to the same time period as the year before, and people stayed an average of an hour. And on any given day, you could bump into 500 to 1,000 people there. Big Car engaged over 16 local artists, and the city collected over 3,000 public feedback responses. And so it was very inspiring to see this double vision playing out in Indianapolis, to look at a street and imagine a place for people to do something different than the usual. It was thrilling to collaborate with enthusiastic partners and experience the buzz of being in a shared space, collectively experiencing the city together in a new way. So, to tie this back to where my story started, I didn't forget about the eggs. When I think back to my childhood egg hunts on my Lola's farm, I never did find that elusive golden egg. But I like to think that my journey to Indianapolis was part of that never-ending search. The energy in the air reminds me of that time period in Boston when people were coming together to start those big, large, ambitious projects whose effects are still visible today. There's power to be found when people love their city, believe in a big vision for it, and then work to make that vision become a reality. To me, this is the golden egg that I've been searching for, and I believe that there are even more treasures yet to come. But keeping the big picture in view requires a significant amount of time and effort. Some things, like the built environment, can become so familiar that you stop seeing it at all. So, I want to challenge all of you. The next time you walk down the street in Indianapolis, I want you to imagine that you're on a treasure hunt of your own. I want you to look around at the world around you and ask yourself, what happens when you pay closer attention to things that you usually don't notice? What happens when you look closer at things that are familiar and what do you start to see? Ask yourself, why is something built this way? Who did it? Because if we start to pay attention to the world around us, we can start to find more meaning and richness in the daily fabric of our lives. We can also start to see opportunities for growth and improvement. And it's this awareness that's the first step to building better, safer, more equitable, vibrant places. And designers like me can help you bring that vision to life. Because creativity in the built environment is all about perspective. Seeing a place as it is and also imagining it as it could be. So I am proud to now call Indianapolis my home. And from my perspective, the future of Indianapolis is very bright indeed.